SamuraiCoding asks, how did the success and scale of MythBusters change how you ran the show? What got easier and what got harder? That's neat.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think as MythBusters grew, in many ways it became easier because more doors opened.
Yeah, people in the very early first season, we would call places and they'd be like, why would I waste any time helping you test this ridiculous thing?
Yeah.
Octopuses birthing in someone's stomach, go away. But once the show was airing, absolutely, I can't think of a time when someone closed the door on us.
You know, you wanna attach a car to our rocket sled and crash it into a concrete block at 500 miles an hour. When can you come?
I will say, when we wanted to do the scuba diver gets picked up by a firefighting helicopter and deposited in a tree during a forest fire, that there was no one who would lend us that Sikorsky pump. But that was still first season. First, second season.
We tried to find a solution to that by saying, okay, we're not going to do the diver. We're going to do the firefighting helicopter that dropped water on an RV and crushed it.
Oh, right.
And again, they were like, no, we don't want you to do that, just in case that has happened before.
Did you, I definitely have a couple of phone calls that stand out in the research phase of doing the story. Do you have any spectacular conversations you had that went weird or off the rails? I'll tell you the one that I remember was, we were doing swimming in syrup. I found out that the study of viscosity is called tribology. And online, there's an International Association of Tribologists, and they have a president whose phone number is on the website. So I called him and I was like, I want to come up with an analog test for viscosity so I can show the audience what it is. And it was very clear immediately that he was upset by my question. And over the course of the next 10 minutes that we talked, I realized that it was because my question was, to a scientist, not even wrong.
Yeah.
Viscosity is not an absolute value you can ascribe like almost every other property of a physical material. And this is where I learned this. Viscosity describes a relationship between a material and its environment. And that's the proper way to consider it. And that really helped me produce that episode. But he didn't end that phone call any more confident he could help me than when we began.
Yeah.
But hearing that upset in his voice I consider that one of these sort of sea changes in my head of understanding how a scientist thinks of something as opposed to how a regular civilian does.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the other, what got easier and what got harder, I think there are two things that got slightly harder as we got bigger. The first was, in some ways, the way we all ran the show, that I sort of tried to bring in this idea of Kaizen, continuous improvement. What we do today is better than yesterday, and what we do tomorrow is better than today, which is great until you get to day 3,500, and then it's quite difficult. Yeah. So in some ways, we sometimes raise the bar too much for ourselves to better.
Well, I remember you complaining when we did a car myth and we delivered you something like 30 hours of B-roll from cars. Because we had like 17 cameras rolling all day long inside the
amount of logging and data. Yeah.
I do remember you, I will tell you honestly that I remember you calling and going, you guys got to give us a little less. And when we hung up, we were like, yeah, we're not. We're just going to keep on sending the same amount of footage.
Yeah. I tell you the other thing that I think got harder is, I don't know whether it was Discovery or whether it was some random person, but a YouTube channel started called MythBusters for the Impatient. Oh. And it took Blueprint the Myth and then Act 6 finale and put the two together. And that was really popular because I suppose it appeals slightly to, what I would now call the TikTok generation. I don't know what we called it in 2012. But just going to that, I think then it meant there was pressure on the show to make the meat of the sandwich, which for me was always the interesting bit. That is the journey of discovery where you're figuring everything else out. That was the bit I loved the most.
I agree.
But that made it a challenge, I think.
I was doing an appearance at a con recently, and I was telling the audience, one of the things I'm fond of saying is, let's be clear, we were in a 6-act structure. That's how many commercial breaks there were. And all the science in an episode happens by the end of Act 5. Act 6 is just to keep you around for that big fat commercial break at the end. Yeah. But Act 5 is where the real meat occurs.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something that got more difficult that we found a workaround for was that, again, the show was steadily climbing in the ratings for the first several years. It was a real juggernaut. And when that happened, Discovery had a lot of side quests for Jamie and I. Hey, can you come host this thing? Can you come be part of this thing? Zaslav wants you to come to his party. All these different things happened. And we ended up instituting a policy with Discovery that if they wanted more than one conference call in a day, they had to pay for a whole nother day of production.
But again, that's because of the treadmill, isn't it? It was
we were working too fast and too hard to guarantee we would be near a phone on a specific day. It was that complicated. Yeah. Because we were like, one day we might be in the shop and the next day we're running out to a swimming pool with 6 hours notice. And so that stopped them from having all these Zoom calls asking us to go do this thing. Yeah. That was nice.
The thing I like most, people often ask me, what did you enjoy most on MythBusters? It was the planning weeks. So, which we only instigated in, I don't know, year 5 or something. So it's like you said, MythBusters ran a bit like school semesters, 3 months off, 3 months on, 2 weeks off, 3 months on.
Yeah.
And we would start the 3 months with a sit down of these are the 8 myths we're going to do. Yeah. How are we going to do them? And it was massive whiteboard, write it all up. And I thought that was the creative highlight of the show, designing those experiments. That was great.
I totally agree with you. That was the part I found most creatively rewarding. I love even to this day, when I break a story, I have to break it vertically. I got to write it down by hand. I can't type it. Yeah. And when I write it and then it gels and then I copy it and I move it, I still have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of whiteboard pictures from production. And they're all such great testaments to what was going on there. Those weeks were incredible.
They were great.
I mean, and the other thing that I loved is that there'd be moments, I mean, this would happen on any given story where I would go, look, we're going to do tactical driving like this. And I think we start with this experiment because that's the obvious place to start. And then Steve would be like, mate, no, this is the obvious. And like, we'd find that Jamie, Steve-O, I, and Saws might all have completely different ideas about what's the obvious place to start. Mm. And whenever that disagreement happened, I'm thrilled because that just means we're opening up what the audience's reaction is going to be.
Yeah.
Right? So if the audience is also that divided, then let's approach that and do all 4 of these things.
The only thing that sometimes I found frustrating, but learn also to love it, was we'd brainstorm this thing, you'd get it all ready, it'd be beautifully written up on the whiteboard, and then Jamie would have been quite quiet through the whole thing, and then he would suddenly say, I think we should look at this from the bottom upwards, or words to that effect. Yeah. And it was basically, okay, he just wants us to unpick it and start again. But 9 times out of 10, it would then improve slightly.
It really would.
Or end up where it was, but you had more confidence.
I really specifically remember the most that moment that happened was we were doing Raiders, and we had bought a Zorb, which was going to stand in for our giant rolling Indiana Jones ball. And Jamie had textured it and painted it to look like a stone. And then he turned around to you and me and said, what are we actually testing here? And there was this like, what feels like a half-hour pause while the 3 of us were like, yeah, I guess this one's got to go away because none of us have an answer to that. That would happen.
That's what happened. And on all, I think it put in a cameo appearance in the cold open. In the very beginning, pre-title. Yeah, you were being chased by it, I think, around Empire.
I mean, the other thing that happened frequently that I really appreciate is that we would get to the final experiment of a story, which would require us to frame the final experiment of the story, which was often sometimes the first time we were reframing the story from the beginning. And frequently we'd find there, oh, we've been talking about this all wrong. Now that we've gone through the path of all the science of this, we understand it from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. Thus, the myth is going to be phrased completely differently. Yeah. Though I also loved that clarity.
Yeah. I mean, I remember we did change. We used to shoot the show almost in order. Mm-hmm. So day 1, we would shoot Blueprint the Myth and Blueprint the Plan. And that
didn't work. We had to reshoot a lot of those.
And so then we always did them on the last day.
I will say shooting Blueprints got harder over the years simply because we got more focused about it. So we would have blueprint days once a month where we would shoot for like 8 hours. We'd shoot 6 stories. And that was a slog. That was really...
That room got so hot, didn't it?
It got hot in that room. It got hard repeating lines. I mean, people ask if our stuff was written down. And while it was definitely worked over, what we said to camera was for the most part off the top of our heads and then workshopped. But in the blueprint, it was very, very structured. And that's fundamentally more tiring.
Yeah. Because often, actually, the show would be halfway through post-production.
Yeah, we'd have shot it 2 months ago.
Yeah, would then say, actually, no, this line is really, we've got to have that exact line. And you guys would not always do that exact line.
We would have issues. Hey guys, Adam Savage from Tested here. If you've ever seen the 6-inch ruler in inches and centimeters on my forearm and wanted one of your own, but you didn't want it to be permanent, well, today's your lucky day. You can now buy temporary tattoos of my measuring stick, my measuring forearm, at tested-store.com. Comes like this, goes on in about 30 seconds with a little water. The instructions are on the back. It comes off with rubbing alcohol, and hopefully it warms you up to the idea of permanently attaching a measuring device to your body, because I use mine every single day.